Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll just give it about 30 seconds to a minute to let students get in. Alrighty, we will get started. Welcome to today's GRADnavigate session on designing your degree for both master's and PhD students, applicable for both. I will drop the link in the chat later, but just so you know, we do have a lineup of other GRADnavigate events happening this term, including one on navigating comprehensive exams for those of you who are getting to that point in your PhD program. Or whether you're doing a comp exam or a qualifying exam, both will be covered in that session. We will be also having a panel style event on navigating the media for both graduate students and postdoctoral scholars. So if that's of interest to you, check that out. And our GRADnavigate page, which I will share the link later, has a few other events that will be running this term through this series as well. So welcome, so glad you're here, and we will move on. This workshop might not take the full hour and a half, but I have an activity for you all to do, and if there's any point that you have questions, pop them in the chat and we will address that closer to the end of the workshop, and we will get started. So before we go further, I would like to share a territorial acknowledgement. The University of Waterloo acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. And as a personal acknowledgement for myself, as someone whose ancestors settled in the territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendake, Nyamwensio, and Mississauga peoples, I seek to learn more about the injustices Indigenous peoples face, as well as the call to actions advocated for by attending workshops, reading, and conversing with the people around me. I recognize acknowledgements like this are only one step towards reconciliation, and there's still a lot of work to be done across Canada related to the inequities, barriers, and damage colonization has caused. Highly recommend checking out the Office of Indigenous Relations. They have fantastic resources, like documents. They have awesome training events, and other style of events across campus throughout the year. So I highly recommend checking out what resources are available. So in terms of who I am Ashley Ryan. I am the graduate and postdoctoral programming specialist over at Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. So if you have seen any touchstone kind of emails coming to you throughout the term and before a term starts, or in terms of things like our GradFlix competition that are coming up, basically anything program related coming from Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs, you'll probably see my name or face associated with them. Um, it's great to see students coming out to various events and I start to recognize people. So it's really awesome to see you all at different events and highly recommend if you have any questions, feel free to always reach out to me. In terms of my kind of background, I don't typically, address all the things from my educational background, but especially for a program like this today that we're going to talk about in terms of designing your degree. And that talks a little about how, as you go through your degree, and as you probably would have noticed coming out of undergrad, maybe your pathway is not going to be linear, right? Maybe when you started your undergrad, you landed in a grad program and you would have thought that you were going somewhere else, or maybe jumping into industry. Maybe it was a surprise to you that you wanted to pursue graduate studies. And maybe even now, there might be multiple pathways you're considering. So, in terms of my background, I started at the University of Waterloo in 2012 for my undergrad in legal studies with a minor in psychology. At the time going into my undergraduate degree, I was super dead set on going to law school. I really wanted to become either a crown attorney or a criminal defense attorney. I wrote the LSATs. I took things like Legal Studies Society and all of these other kind of legal-based things. But as I was kind of going throughout my degree and figuring out and learning about different opportunities and talking to different people and volunteering on campus, I realized closer to the end of my degree that maybe law school wasn't going to be the pathway for me, even though I had been super like set on going that way. So what I decided to do instead was to go do my master's and PhD, both still at the University of Waterloo, under Dr. Owen Gallup, studying sociology, on crime and peer influence research. And so many of you might be thinking, well, the clear end pathway there after you get your PhD for many people may be professor positions. What I'm doing right now, of course, is not crime related. So what happened was during my degrees, I did a lot of different volunteer work on campus and paid work in relation to being a student wellness coordinator through the Graduate Student Association. I was a Don through an off-campus Don through off-campus community for the Undergraduate Association when I was an undergrad. I'm a Girl Guide leader. And so all of those kind of forms of experience kind of led me even to a completely different direction into more like student success and student support. And so now I mostly do that, but I also teach on the side for undergraduate course in research methods because I found passionate in doing that. And I also still publish in the crime on the side, but what I'm doing now still uses a lot of the skills that I took in my PhD, but in a different topic, basically. So I share that to kind of share that your pathway, it might also not be linear, right? You might get somewhere, you might even get to the end of your PhD and decide to jump into a completely different kind of job than you were expecting even a year prior. And that's totally okay. So, what are we here to talk about today in relation to this GRADnavigate workshop on designing your degree? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about design thinking, how it works in general, and how we can kind of apply it with this kind of topic of your own life and your career. We'll be talking about your academic milestones, how to find them, your actual degree requirements, what's required base versus what's kind of a nice to have option that people tell you that you should do. Because some of those things may not actually be actual requirements or milestones to move forward. And we are actually going to be talking about designing your degree, which is what we're mainly here for, and how we're going to apply concepts like design thinking to designing your degree to help you kind of open your mind to different possibilities and brainstorm instead of being very like tunnel visioned into one set pathway. Then we're going to talk about wrapping up and what's next and various resources such as the Center for Career Development. I should also mention, I think I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, that this workshop is being recorded. So if there's a concept that you want to go back to, we will be posting it on our website as well. All right. So we're going to jump right into design thinking. So design thinking is something that some of you may have come across before, especially if you are in kind of user experience research, or you're in the social sciences, or you maybe are in engineering and you kind of implement design thinking through human-centered products, like maybe designing phones or other things that people usually interact with. Design thinking is something that typically comes into play when we start thinking about those things. And so, in terms of what design thinking is and how it differs from some other forms of thinking, like analytical thinking or strategic thinking, is that these are kind of the key areas that really define design thinking. The first one is it's an approach to problem solving, which a lot of thinking is, but the difference between design thinking and some other forms of thinking is that it's very based on the user and the solution compared to the problem itself. So it really is human-centered. It really takes into consideration what are the needs and values of whoever the problem and solution is going to relate to. It's based on building a way forward, but it's also a very iterative process that values failure. Along the way, failure in this kind of line of thinking is a good thing because that means that you've reached a point where something might not work, but that just means you're one step closer to something else working. And so it's iterative in the way that we go throughout the process of design thinking, but we might have to go back to an earlier point in the thinking process that we're going to talk about in order to find a new way forward. So, why would we use a design thinking in particular? Um, the largest reason I would say for this is that design thinking is particularly good, a good approach to things called wicked problems. And so, being graduate students, you might have actually seen advertised in graduate e-news and throughout the school that sometimes we actually run courses called that have wicked problems in the name. And they're interdisciplinary in nature, and they take the opinions and perspectives of different scholars from different backgrounds, like even biology or sociology, engineering, and they co-teach a course on whatever the course topic is that term. So, a wicked problem in general is basically a complex problem that's multifaceted that doesn't really have one clear solution. And so, examples to wicked problems are things like life, education, finding love, vocation wayfinding, things like poverty, climate change, but there is no one solution to those kind of problems, right? They're wicked, they're massive, they're complex, they have all of the different components and moving cogs in the wheel to figure out how we move forward. And so design thinking is good for this approach in that it kind of figures out different solutions and it's maybe even requires multi-solutions. So here's the kind of idea of what the design thinking process looks like from a bird eye view. A lot of things are happening internally, but some of these things may actually come into a physical way, like depending on what you're using the design process thinking for. So at the beginning phase, you'll see empathize. And basically what that is remember what I told you that design thinking is really human-centered. It really matters that we understand then through the empathize stage who our users are for whatever solution and problem that we're looking at. And so let's say if we're looking at different styles and different mechanics for creating a phone, for example, like a cell phone. We then need to know who's going to be using our phone, what they value, how they might interact with the product, how they want to interact with the product, maybe different backgrounds of people who are going to be using certain products, different demographic situations, how users might interact with the product differently around the world in different areas, what's needed for that person to use that product successfully. It's similar when we look at more abstract things like our life or love or things like that, is that the really thing important to remember is that we need to know, we need to understand who the user is, we need to understand what they value and how they're going to interact with the solution. The next thing that we move along to in the design thinking process is defining the problem. And so once we know who the solution and the problem is going to relate to, we need to understand, what is the problem? What are we looking at in this process? What are we going to be thinking of solutions for? And so in the define stage, we actually have to define what the problem is. That will move on to our ideate stage, which is kind of like brainstorming. So we're going to be thinking of potential different solutions and how different pathways for moving forward. When we have those kind of lists of different brainstorming ideas and options, we pick one or more of those options. Then we move to the prototype stage where we actually design items or ways or strategies to bring those ideas that you came across in your brainstorming to life through prototyping. Similar with the phone example of you making different formats for the home screen or different ways that the buttons are located. We're making those prototypes that people are going to be testing out. Then we move to the testing stage where we're actually testing out those ideas that we created based on the problem and the user. So the thing about the design thinking process that I mentioned is that it's iterative, right? It's not just going to be one linear process where we get from emphasize to define, ideate, prototype, test, and then it's done. That's not how this process works. It's meant for us to fail at different points and go back and forward to different areas. So for example, maybe when we get to that prototype stage, it sparks new ideas. And then we're going backwards to the ideate stage to create more ideas before moving forward. And maybe those are going to be better than the ones that you initially thought of. Maybe when we get down to the testing stage, we then come out with different ideas. So we go back to the brainstorming stage. Maybe when we get to the testing stage, we realize that the ideas and the items or strategies or life pathways that we've come up with through ideating and prototyping and then getting to that testing stage is that we figured out that it's actually not addressing the problem. And so we figured out maybe there's some different features of the problem we didn't think about before, and we had to go back and redefine the problem in order to work on that solution. So maybe we have to go back from the testing stage and we have to go back a few steps to back to defining what the problem is. Maybe through our testing, we actually learn more about the users. Maybe we learn more about ourselves. Like, for example, with this whole design your degree based on like design your life concepts. Maybe when we're testing out different career pathways or different types of schooling and in for different courses, we actually learn more about ourselves. That's really changes the game. And now we have all of these different options that might be available to us or other options we want to maybe trial out. And so we go back to the test stage and we're back at the emphasize stage at more learning about the users. So today, when we talk about designing your degree, we're going to be really focusing on the ideate and prototype phases of this design thinking process. And that is because the users through the empathize stage are going to be yourselves, right? You're designing your degree in relation to like career aspirations and goals and things like that. And so you already most likely have a fairly good understanding of who you are, what you value, and have ideas of where you want to go. And the definition of the problem is around, a career solution at the end, like what you want to jump into, what you want to happen after your degree, where do you want to end up? And so those things, the empathize and the define stages, they can still take more work than that and more defining, for example. And you may have to go back and do that and do more some self-reflection on those things. But for today's purposes, we're really going to be focused on brainstorming ideas and pathways forward for your designing your degree and kind of creating those prototypes. So when we are going through and using design thinking, there are certain mindsets that we have to kind of deploy and use in order to make this design thinking kind of successful as we go. And so different mindsets include radical collaboration. What this really means is that it means like working with other people, talking to people from different backgrounds of maybe different careers you might be interested in or are taking different courses than you because maybe they're taking a course you may be interested in. Getting feedback from people, just having conversations, learning about people from different backgrounds. And being at the University of Waterloo, we are in a particularly really great place for that, right? Because you have all these people from tons of different backgrounds, different fields from, anything from religious studies to sociology, looking at crime, to chemical engineering and health and rec and leisure studies, tons of different academic fields. There's tons of different people at different stages of their life at the university. There's tons of different people from all around the world, which is super cool to be able to interact with everyone from all these different countries at the university. But also outside the university, having that radical collaboration and brainstorming and having conversations about what you want to do with your life and where you want to go potentially with friends and family and other people that you come across, maybe even at a networking event or a job fair. We also need to, when we're using design thinking, is thinking about reframing the problem. So we don't get kind of tunnel vision into looking into a problem or a potential solution in one set way. We need to be able to take a step back, maybe flip the problem around and looking at it from a different angle to get more information. And the reason I say that is like think about even as a physical object, right? I have kind of like a pop can in my hand. If you're looking at it just from this angle, you're getting a certain amount of information, right? It's specifically, you're going to be seeing only the top of it. You don't have information from any other side of this item. Flip it to the back, you're kind of getting a different view of the item. You're looking at the side. Now you're getting all of these nutritional facts and different types of information that you weren't before looking at it from the front or from the back. And then you're going to get more information as you twist and turn the item. It's the same thing for more abstract concepts, for different things that are happening in your life, whether it be designing your degree or even like looking at conflict with a friend or a loved one, or if you're having an issue with a course, it's important to kind of step back and try to look at it from different angles to see and get other information, and that might help you gather what you need to move forward. Another important design thinking mindset is having curiosity. And this relates to what I mentioned about how failure is actually valuable in the design thinking process. Because when failure happens, I know it's kind of like associated with like something bad, but it can be really good. When something fails, it means that, okay, this was not working in my life. Um, Now it's going to prompt you to look at why didn't this work? Why didn't I like this? Why wasn't I happy? Like asking those questions, being curious as to why it failed, why it didn't work out. Maybe why you didn't get a job at a certain company through a co-op position, or why a relationship didn't work out for someone you were dating, for example. Being curious, instead of just kind of brushing it off and ignoring it, will help you kind of be self-aware and be kind of reflective of why it didn't work and how things might have to slightly change in order for something else to work out in the future that will make you happier. Bias towards action. And what this means is that in the design thinking process, we always have to be moving forward or backwards or somewhere. We have to be moving somewhere, right? So this means that when we get to a point of failure of something not working out, we can't just stay there and go, oh well, like guess I'll just keep doing whatever this is, right? We have to have this bias towards figuring something else out, finding that new path and figuring it out, making decisions on walking down that new path or strolling down that new path, and just making sure you're doing something, being reflective and thinking about options and creating new prototypes and testing those prototypes that we're going to talk about. Just moving somewhere. And we have to be mindful of the process. So again, I've used the word kind of reflection a lot in this kind of presentation, especially on this slide. And it is also important to know and be reflective of where you are in the process and where you might have to go. So if you're constantly creating these prototypes and ideas and you're thinking like this just continues to not work, like why is this not working? Like if you're just kind of in an endless loop of something not working, it's important to be able to know where you are in the process and where you might have to go back to in order to change and get out of that loop. So for example, remember when I was talking about earlier about how sometimes we get to the testing or the prototyping stages and we realize that we don't know enough about the users that we're trying to design for, or maybe we haven't defined the problem to the point that it has to be defined at. And so we have to know where we are and where we need to go in the design thinking process in order to make it have that process work. So why might design thinking be a good approach to graduate school? So why are we here talking about in relation to design thinking with your graduate degree? There are a variety of reasons to why design thinking it works really well with graduate students in particular. One reason is that in your graduate studies, not as much for course-based if you're a master's course-based student, but it can still apply because you still have that wiggle room sometimes with choosing courses is that graduate education, it offers more focus, but at the same time, it's really independent, and there's usually a ton of options with how you go about completing your degree. So yes, you have those degree milestones that we're going to talk about, such as, for example, comprehensive exams, but often, the comprehensive exam of someone in your program might look completely different to yours. Maybe the courses that you choose to focus on are completely different than someone else, even in the same stream. I might be doing something in criminology and crime and peer influence, and the student next to me is focusing on the healthcare system. We all have such unique different pathways as grad students. And there's so many ways to create unique design mechanisms in your program. So it's not all the same. We're not all having the same graduate student experience. It is important to use design thinking or something like it as a grad student to take charge of your education by becoming a co-designer of your degree instead of just being a good student or letting grad school happen to you. And what I say by that is that, yes, it's important to have good relationships with our supervisors, and sometimes, they provide good guidance, and there are resources on campus and staff and faculty that will help guide you through a graduate program. That's what we're here to do. We're here to help you. But you should be playing an active role in that, right? We don't know where you want to go after your degree necessarily. You're the one that's going to know what's going to make you happy and what you want to do with your life in and outside of academia and what you want to do with your degree later or be able to do. And so it's important that you take that active role of co-designing what you do in your degrees and how you complete those milestones. In today's session, past this point, we're going to be thinking about familiarizing ourselves with degree requirements to design your program to achieve these within your timeframes. We're going to identify where flexibility exists to design your own degree experience and begin to identify kind of additional areas of need in your graduate student journey. If there's somewhere you want to go after your degree, for example, but there might be additional resources or skills that you need to build along the way. All right, so now we've talked about design thinking in general. We're going to jump into our academic milestones and degree requirements. And I know that many of you might have already done this and know exactly what is required and not required for your program to walk across that convocation stage at the end of your degree. But sometimes not everyone knows exactly what is required versus not required, but is a nice to have thing, and where to find this information. So we're going to briefly talk about that. So, when we hear the term academic milestones, what exactly is it? Like, what is that term? What does it mean? It means non-course degree requirements. It's often not something that's scheduled at a set time or term. Sometimes degree academic milestones will have kind of timelines in terms of like when you have to have that milestone complete by. For example, for many cases for comprehensive exams, many programs will say that you have to have it completed by like term 7 or 8 or something like that. But it doesn't have like this happens in this term. Again, some programs might be a bit more strict with that, but typically they're a bit more open, especially for the PhD students, because we're here a bit longer. They typically appear at the bottom of students' academic record, typically indicating an in progress or until completed. They do not typically follow the same structure of a course, so not necessarily regular meeting times. You're probably not going to be getting like a percentage grade on the academic milestone, like 83%, for example. It's usually noted as something else, such as like completed or you've passed that milestone. So there's different kind of mechanics and rubrics for what constitutes as like a pass, for example, depending on that milestone. But it's not typically graded historically like your like a course would be. And so before we move to the next page, I want you to use the chat just to plop in any sort of graduate academic milestones that are part of your program. Like what's some that come to mind? And we'll give you a minute to do that. Just anything. It could be coursework, if you have a comprehensive exam, anything that comes to mind that you think is one of your academic milestones. And just pop that right in the chat. All right, I'm not seeing any come in, but that's totally okay because we're going to talk about them. So, what are some examples of academic milestones that you may have to do for your program that you might have already had conversations with your graduate department coordinator or your supervisor or someone from another resource on campus? But here's some of the ones that you may have to be completing. Things like the academic integrity module that all graduate students have to complete and have their record. Maybe you have required training such as WMIS, but not everyone might not have that, right? Like for example, over in sociology, I didn't have the requirement of having to complete WMIS. Um, oh, the webinar chat is disabled. Okay, that's good to know. Huh, that's strange. All right. Sorry, folks. I didn't know that the web chat was disabled showing on my screen. But that's good to know the Q&A is working. So if you have any questions popping up throughout, feel free to pop them in there whenever, because then I'll just address them at the end. So example, like what I was saying about WMIS. So, being in sociology, I didn't have to do WMIS. I wasn't dealing with like chemicals or anything, not many things that were related to WMIS content, so I didn't have to do that. But if you're over in chemistry, biology, a lot of engineering, you're probably going to have to do WMIS. Some of you may have co-ops or internships or practicums that you have to do to complete your program. Um, Many of you, especially if you're a PhD student, may have to complete a research proposal. Especially if you're a thesis master's student or a PhD student, you may have data collection or research on as an official academic milestone. Sometimes it doesn't show up as an official academic milestone, even though it's still something that you have to do. The thesis submission is definitely going to be an academic milestone if you are a thesis-based master's or PhD student. And many of you will also have things like oral thesis defense as an academic milestone. If you're a PhD student, like I was saying, most of you will have comprehensive or qualifying exam milestones. So there's tons of different milestones. The important thing to know is that, not everyone in your department may have the same milestones, right? So for example, when I was doing my master's in sociology, there were three different streams to the master's program, right? There was the course-based stream, there was the major research paper stream, and there was the thesis-based stream. All three of those streams had different academic milestones and different kind of timelines involved with them. So it's important that you know in particular what is required for you in your specific program. Sometimes even milestones change from year to year if the program is reevaluated or something like that. So it's important to know what you need to know to complete your degree so you don't get to what you think is the end of your program and then you realize like, oh crap, like I didn't know I had to do this additional course or I didn't know I had to do this other milestone. Some of you may even have like professional development pieces as well. So a large resource for you to access to find your milestones are the Graduate Studies Academic Calendar. You should be able to click on it right on the screen, and I'll send out the slides as well. Or if you just Google Grad Academic Studies Academic Calendar URLu, you'll be able to find it. You can find your milestones by logging into Quest as well and looking at your transcript or looking at your kind of program breakdown in Quest. You can find them by talking to your grad coordinator as well. So if you aren't fully confident in what exactly is required milestone-wise, I highly recommend looking into that sooner than later. And when you go to the grad studies academic calendar, this is typically what you're going to see. So this is kind of like the home screen. And what this holds is all of the program requirements for a ton of different years and a ton of different program streams. And so what this will allow you to do is find exactly your program and your requirements. So this is what you're going to initially see when you get to the grad studies academic calendar. You can then search for your program. And so, for example, let's say I looked up sociology in general, which is like a department based. So there's tons of things that would fall under sociology, right? Like PhD, sociology, co-op versus non-co-op, master's thesis, co-op versus non-co-op, MRP option, course-based option. So even when you get to like whatever your field is, like biology or sociology or applied mathematics, um, you might still have to look specifically for your degree. So let's say I got down and it looks like this is the degree requirements for what was my master's thesis-based program in sociology. And so here's exactly what it lays out. It has what is required from the degree requirement. It has what is required for the thesis option. So it says exactly which courses I need to take in order to qualify for the degree. Further down on the page, if I were to scroll, because this is just a screenshot, it would have, a clear outline of what is required for the thesis. And if there is, for example, an oral defense that is required or something like that. So it will outline it all right there. So you can do this for your program as well, or even just good to go get a refresher. So maybe I will answer if there's any questions right now before we go further. I'm happy to answer those as well. So I'll pause for a minute to see if anything pops up in the Q&A. So in order to submit a question, you're probably going to see it at the bottom of your screen. There's a section that might come up as Q&A, or you might have to go to the more with the circle with the dot, dot, dot in there to go find the Q&A function. If it's not on the bottom of your screen, it will be at the top, but I think for you, it will be at the bottom. All right, not seeing anything come in yet, so feel free if something comes up, pop it in there. Right. So now we talked about design thinking and how that works, and we've talked about, finding your academic milestones for your degree. Now we're going to talk about that meat of what the title for this program is designing your degree. So how we are going to do that today is through something called Odyssey plans. And what it is an Odyssey plan takes the design thinking process and it helps us with the idea and prototype features of design thinking to create prototypes for our future. So basically, we're coming up with ideas about potential futures and then trying them on in our brains. When we think about the future, especially with, if we have parents that really want to see us go a certain way, or friends, or we have this pressure on ourselves to become someone specific, we can become kind of tunnel visioned and think of the future, where there's only one option and that's what you got to do and that's where you want to go to get there. But the reality is there are so many alternative futures. So many different things that you could do. And it's important to stay open-minded so that when you go off into the world after your degrees and you find a career, it's important to know that you can change that career if you're not happy in that. Treat it as something you were testing out and maybe go down a different pathway, go find a different career. Just know that it's important to be just open-minded, know that there's different options available to you. So with our Odyssey plans, which uses that design thinking process, we basically create three alternative futures that we try on in our brain. So why we create multiple Odyssey plans is basically like I was saying, we're creating those different alternative futures to try on. So how we do this is three different steps. So through step one, and I'm gonna give you a worksheet, so don't have to worry about thinking about this yet, is we create three titles for your alternative futures. And these should be like drastically pretty different. Like if you create three different futures, such as like PhD at Waterloo, PhD at U of T, and PhD at UBC, they're not really three alternative future, right? They're all kind of leaning to a similar thing of, doing your PhD, for example, or maybe replace it with postdoc if you're a PhD. And they're all going to have fairly similar roots in terms of like what you do during your degree to get there, right? What I'm talking about is like three like different futures. Whether it be like, doing your PhD or doing a postdoc as one future at Waterloo or wherever else. Maybe it is an industry-based future. Like maybe if you're in engineering or something, you want to go work for Google doing something or Tesla or wherever. Maybe it's a public sector future, like maybe you're going to work for the government of Canada. Or an entrepreneurial future, maybe you're going to go start a business for a product that you have or a service that you have built skills towards. Or maybe like a wild idea future, like maybe you're gonna um go, sometimes I pick one for examples of like, oh, I'm gonna go become like a tree trek specialist out in BC. Like I'm gonna go do tree trekking and like or like teach people the safety of like zip lining in the trees, and that's gonna be a career, a wild idea future. Even with this like wild idea future, even if you know like, that's probably something we wouldn't be something I like actually do, it's still, even if you think that, it's still a good practice to have that kind of brainstorming to force your brain into thinking about different options. Because maybe when you're thinking about that wild idea future, there are related career options that you pop up or think about along the way that go, okay, maybe this like wild idea future wasn't as much something I wanted to do, but maybe this other related thing that's nothing related to a PhD or a postdoc, for example, is something that I might actually be interested in and it might apply to what I'm doing. So once we have those three different titles, we're going to actually think about those by adding plans and goals into each of the different three Odyssey plans. These terms can be short, but consider adding at least one personal and one professional development item in each term or each year if you're kind of planning for more of the PhD. If you're doing a PhD, you could do it by year instead of term, because there'd be many terms if you're doing your PhD. Consider if you need to move around your degree requirements in one future or another. So there are some, like I was mentioning, some degree requirements or academic milestones are more flexible than others, and that maybe you do it at the start of your program, maybe they're ones that you shuffle to complete closer to the end. There are some options with that. And remember that while some plans and goals may be the same throughout your three plans, your plans shouldn't all look identical. And then we get to the plan three once we have created those titles and we've implemented all of these steps and goals and things that we're going to do this plan. We're going to evaluate that alternative future. And how we're going to do that is through four different things. We're going to look at and think about resources. So thinking about, you look at this plan and you think, do I have the objective resources to pull this off, to do this future? And resources could be anything from time in your life or perceived time in the future. money that you have or perceived money that you might have at the point of getting to that point in your future, the skills that you've been building, the contacts, that you've built through networking. Do you have those things to pull this off? If you don't at this moment in time, but you still want to take that alternative future, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that will help you identify where you might need to build up your resources in order to take that future. So for example, something like if I had wanted to go to law school, like law school tuition costs a lot of money. So maybe at the time I would have been like, oh, like I need to find a way maybe to get access to funding or scholarships or more money to do that future if I wanted to. Then you're gonna look at, do you like it? How do you feel about this plan? Like, is this, if you, are you looking at this alternative future and you're going like, ugh, like, I would never want to do this? Or is it something that you're thinking like, you know what? I really like this. I'm really excited about this plan. This is something I could actually see myself doing. Maybe I should look into this. So kind of gauging if you're actually interested in that. And I say that especially for people who, if you're getting really tunnel vision and because your parents, for example, are pressuring you to do a certain career, but you, at the deep of your heart or the back of your mind, you're thinking like, I don't think I'm gonna like this. I don't think I'm actually gonna like doing this thing. So it's important to, like what you're doing. The third option, thing that we're going to evaluate is confidence. So are we confident that we can pull this plan off? And if we're not confident, how can we build the skills to become more confident? Or how can we build that confidence? And lastly, coherence. So really like thinking about, does that plan make sense with itself? Like, are the things that we're going to be doing in this alternative future, do they make sense? Like, are they completely out of whack? Like, do we need to move some things around to make it flow and make it make more sense to where we're going? Is it consistent with who you are as a person? So all of these things we're going to look at, and then you basically just evaluate that plan. And that's how we kind of virtually in our brains try it on. So I don't have three side by side to give you, but remember, this is kind of like one of the three Odyssey plans, for example. So under this one, this was created, let's say, for someone in engineering, and their title is like, they're going to be like a software engineer. And for example, I see in their year 5 of their PhD, maybe they want to apply to places like Google or other software-based positions in California. I'm not in engineering myself, but let's go through this and look. But maybe another Odyssey plan for them, maybe this one's their software engineer. Maybe also during their degree, they were someone that was like the vice president of the Graduate Student Association, and they got really involved with like kind of politics, and they were interested in advocacy work. And maybe they, have a different alternative plan that relates to that with government or other kind of organizations and nonprofit. Maybe they have a wild idea future of, I don't know, working at like an elephant safety and protection sanctuary in a different country. Who knows? So a software engineer, let's see. So it looks like when we're looking at this photo, we're looking at it from the perspective of PhD. It looks like because it's broken up by year. But like I was saying, because if you're a master's student, your degree is a lot shorter. So you could actually, instead of by year, do it by term, like term 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example. And so they've kind of color coded the different types of goals and things that they're going to do over this degree to get to the point that they want towards becoming a software engineer. So the orange that you see on here are things like academic milestones. So for example, in year 1, they had like their graduate academic integrity module, and they've done the coursework. Maybe year 2, they're working on looks like comprehensive exams and some seminar presentations. Kind of year 3, year 4, they have kind of an overblock looking at data collection and research, and they have a seminar 2 presentation. Year 4, it looks like they're planning on doing things like their oral thesis exam, either a year 4 or year 5, kind of overlapping, and doing their seminar presentation again. In terms of professional development, which might look drastically different from your different alternative futures, compared to maybe your academic milestones. Things like, in year one, maybe they're attending a conference or a student leadership program. Year two looks like maybe they're going to volunteer with an organization like Go Code Girl. Year three, we're getting into potentially some maybe wanting to publish or attending like Google networking events. Or maybe they're doing a coding competition. Year four, we're getting closer to kind of the end of the degree, so they're looking at networking more. Maybe in year five, they're volunteering still and kind of finding their way closer to that software engineer through like connections. Then we have a red, which is like the kind of personal goals. So maybe because like I was mentioning, it's important to think about other areas of your life, right? Like your academics don't take place in a vacuum. You have other things in your life going on with your family, your friends, your hobbies. And in order for you to move forward efficiently and productively in your program, it's important to, be well balanced and still enjoy and be happy and look after your wellness and do the things that you like to do. It's your life. So, in year one, they say that they're going to go do training for a marathon. Year two, they're going to go visit family back home. Maybe they're from a different country like China, India, England, Germany, like who knows? Looks like year three, they're going to actually do more marathon training, but they're going to in year four actually do that marathon and they're going to visit family again. But there can be tons of different personal goals in here. Maybe you want to learn how to rock climb. Maybe you want to, I don't know, get a dog, go to Disney World, go to Taiwan, like anything like that. And then we have kind of post-degree goals or activities that are kind of showing up in year 4 and 5. Things like learning out about US work visas, for example, or looking to move to California or applying to Google jobs and other software jobs in California, because applying to those kind of jobs makes sense for that kind of title of software engineer. So then you would basically make this, but 2 other times with drastically different futures about what you'd want to do. And then you'd evaluate it again. So like I mentioned, we're going to evaluate the resources. So in terms of time, money, skills, for me, as someone from sociology and with a criminal and peer behavior background, I don't have any training in software engineering. So if I were to create this feature, I would personally rate this low as a resources because I don't personally, at this moment in time, have the skills to pull off this feature. But someone in software engineering may be like, yes, like I have the time, the money, the know-how, and the skills to pull this off. And then you evaluate things like, do I like this feature? Would I be happy with this feature? Is it coherent? Like, do all of these things make sense as you see the plan go from year to year? Does it make sense of what it's working towards, which is that software engineer future? So that's what it looks like. So you would have gotten this sheet in your mailbox, but I'm going to send it to you again in the chat, which hopefully you will receive as well. But if not, it is in your inbox from the reminder from this morning. So what we're going to do right now is we are going to take 10 minutes to start working on that. You don't need to finish it. If you don't get around to making all 3, that's okay as well. But it's just to get you thinking about it. So I am going to find it. Okay, design your degree plans. All right, hopefully you will see that pop up in the chat, even though if you can't write in it, but I should be able to send it to you. So the document should be in there. So again, I'm not going to force you to work on it, but pop it in, do some thinking. Again, if you're a master's student, maybe treat it as term by term. If you're a PhD student, maybe treat it year by year. And we'll come back in about 10 minutes. So here's the steps right on the screen as well, right? We're stepping 1, we're creating those titles, we're adding those goals and plans and things we want to do to work towards that future. And then you're thinking about kind of just being reflective of it and evaluating it. So I will turn this off and I'll let you chip away and I'll let you know when to come back. All right, I'll give you about like 20 seconds more to wrap up your thoughts. And again, you can always work on it after as well, or whatever you'd like to. All right, so welcome back. Hopefully, some of you took that opportunity to design those alternative futures or started one of them, for example. So, I'm not going to make anyone share or anything like that, but things to look at or questions to look at as you're self-reflecting on your futures, whether it be now or later on, if you wanted to finish those, are things like, who are you willing to share your plans with? So, like I mentioned with the design thinking process, an important piece of radical collaboration. So maybe you want to talk about these potential plans with friends or family or people that you're networking with. Where might you need more information? How can you find the information that you need? So if there's a career path that you're like, hey, this is actually maybe kind of interesting. What do I need to get there? Maybe you need some more information. So maybe figuring out like where can you find that information, whether it be through the Center for Career Development, whether it be, conducting informational interviews with people in that field, maybe looking around LinkedIn or doing a career test or looking around online, looking at job advertisements to see what they're looking for in a candidate for that kind of role. Just kind of thinking how you could find that information. And when you're doing your evaluation of resources and if you like it and things like that, if you find that there was alternative future or for your future that you've created where your resources or confidence levels are low for whatever case, looking at are there ways that you can increase your confidence or resources in order to carry out that plan? Because, like I was saying, if you don't currently have the skills, the time, or the money, or the confidence to carry out one of those alternative futures, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you might not be ready yet to fully get to that end goal. And maybe there are different skills or things that you need to build along the way or work into that future to get there. So now we're gonna move over to the wrap up and what's next component. So, when we're looking at design thinking and looking at how our degrees and our potential futures align, sometimes we need to actually do some unlearning. Because unlearnings, or what we call it, are just as important as what we learn. So, like I was saying, especially if we have parents or family that are driving us to do one specific career path, and maybe they've done that your whole life, for example, unlearning that there's not just like that only that one right path for us to take when it comes to our careers or our life or relationships or anything like that. Um, there are tons of different options that we can take, and it can be hard to unlearn this idea that there's only one path that we should be going on. We need to kind of unlearn that and be able to open our minds up to other alternative options. So some different takeaways from this workshop today is the design thinking element. So, you could build these things into other design strategy building and design thinking options and creating different strategies and things in your life for building your path forward, whether it be for your degree or relationships or anything like that. It's a great way to tackle wicked problems like your life and career planning. Ideating, so thinking about alternative futures and prototyping, such as trying those futures on, can help you prepare for your future and identify options you may not have considered. Or maybe you're, identifying pieces of yourself maybe you haven't fully discovered yet. And thinking of your alternative futures can help avoid that tunnel vision I was mentioning earlier and keep you open to other opportunities that might come your way or you might spot along the way in your degree. So, what are some resources for graduate students to continue this kind of thinking and moving forward? In terms of coherence and consistency aspects, The Center for Career Development is a great resource for that. They offer fantastic resources such as workshops. They have an asynchronous career hub with different, document resources and quizzes and things like that. They have one-on-one career advising appointments, which I highly recommend. I did that to myself before going into this role with GSPA. Radical collaboration, get involved with other students outside of your lab department and engage more with cross-campus workshops from all the different resources like the Student Success Office, Center for Teaching Excellence, which has now recently been rebranded to a different name, but they'll still be offering workshops. Getting involved with the Grad Student Association. Like, for example, how I had kind of stumbled into this role as student wellness coordinator doing my grad degrees. Or maybe you're even just helping with events. Maybe you're on their kind of council. There's tons of different ways to get involved. Or kind of engage with interdisciplinary work to learn what perspectives people have from different fields, or maybe you'll even be the next person who co-teaches that Wicked Problems course I talked about earlier. And for prototyping, you can find and create different opportunities and ways to prototype your different pieces of plans and those different alternative futures. This could be anything from those informational interviews I was mentioning earlier, maybe internships or volunteer work in that area of interest to kind of figure out like, hey, is this something that I would like to do? And getting a little bit of experience in it before you fully commit to it. So that brings us to the end. It is designing your degree through the GRADnavigate series. Again, I'm here to take questions. So if you have those, put them into the QA now. And I'll also send the links to you right now before you head off as well for our upcoming events. So the first link I'm going to share with you is for our upcoming GRADnavigate events. And then we also have our GradFlix competition, which is coming up very soon. Basically, through GradFlix, students create a 60-second or 1-minute video about their research, and there are cash prizes. So that is coming up soon. The deadline to submit a video is February 10th. On March 10th, we bring all of the finalists with friends and family and people across campus to Fed Hall, and we watch all the finalist videos. We hand out the prizes. For example, the top prize for GradFlix this year is $1,000. And all the finalists get movie packages and stuff as well. And there's free food and snacks at this as well. So highly recommend coming even if you don't want to submit a video this year. So check those links out. And I'm here for another minute too. If you have any questions that pop up, feel free to reach out. But you can also, if anything comes out later, you can also reach out to us at the email that I'm going to pop in the chat as well, which is gradexperience@uwarlu.ca. And thank you for coming to this session.